Welcome to the Nonfiction Writers, podcasting in a great way. I'm Ryan Aber, joined by Jason Kersey. Jason, a little bit different kind of game that we saw last week down in Lubbock. Strange in the first half that OU didn't pound the run, with given Texas Tech's problems with defending the run. Finally, in the second half, that changed. Bob Stoops said yesterday and said right after the game that penalties were a reason, but do you buy that?
Yeah, I think sometimes we get so cynical that we just assume that when they say something that we don't think is right, we just assume that they must be lying. But I actually think he has some points. I mean, they were in first and long, second and long a lot because of penalties, and that did make them have to pass more. Now they did. Now, having said that, I do think there are some instances where they threw the ball and maybe they should have run it, and they clearly changed their philosophy. Penalties are not in the second half to some degree. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that what Bob said is completely bogus. I think he did make some good points.
Yeah, and I think you look at the play-by-play sheet, and there weren't as many penalties as he made it seem, I don't think. But because they only had 3 offensive penalties in the first half, 2 of them came on the same drive. One of them, the second holding, which was the third penalty overall, the last one, only put them in second and 10, and they run for 9 yards the play immediately afterwards. But you look at the flow of that second half, and yeah, there weren't as many opportunities that are just obvious run downs. And I think to some degree, and Josh Heupel sort of mentioned this, they wanted to get Cody Thomas, try to get him in a rhythm. And I know, I talked to some people before the game about, do you try to get him in a rhythm early, or do you try to build a lead with the run and then get him in a passing rhythm after that and get him comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what they were trying to do was obviously get him in a rhythm early, and that I can see why you would do that too. But at the same time, I mean, it's a windy day. It's his first start. It's a hostile environment. To me, it would have made a lot more sense to really pound P. Ryan early, because P. Ryan's the kind of guy I think who doesn't. It sometimes takes him a while to get going. And I think a lot of running backs are like that. I remember last year Brennan Clay saying that when you get more carries, you start to be able to really feel the defense out, and you see where the holes are, and you can really have a better feel for the game. But if you're not getting as many carries, it's harder to do that. And I think P. Ryan's a good example of that. He only had 5 carries against Baylor, and if they'd given him more, and obviously they were facing a deficit, but they weren't doing that the whole first half. So once he got going, he was just he was unstoppable.
Yeah, and we saw Samaje Perine, just the way that he took away Texas Tech's defense's will to tackle pretty quickly in the second half. I mean, we saw, I can't remember exactly what it was. I want to say it was 3 consecutive plays, though, where defenders had to leave the game because they took a hit from Samaje, and we've seen the physicality from him all year. And certainly with Cody Thomas in the quarterback spot moving forward, we know he's going to play this week against Kansas. I would say that it's a possibility, if not a probability, that he's the quarterback for the Sooners in Bedlam against Oklahoma State to finish the regular season. Then Samaje Perine becomes an even bigger weapon because you want to alleviate some pressure off your quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I that's right. I mean, you would think that he would be a big weapon in these next 2 games. But everything, I thought he was going to be a bigger weapon in other games where he wasn't. I thought he'd get more carries against TCU. I thought he'd get more carries against Texas. I certainly thought he'd get more carries against Baylor. So, I mean, I have no idea. But, I mean, you mentioned Cody Thomas. I think that's a good segue into Cody Thomas. I mean, I really think there's a chance he's the quarterback maybe going into next year. And whether Trevor Knight is healthy or not, I think there's a chance because he is a better passer than Trevor. And people are going to talk about the 3 interceptions, but it was, again, first start, hostile environment, windy day. They didn't really give him much, they didn't put him in very good position to succeed in some moments. But we know he's a good passer, and we know he's got a good arm. He's taller. He can see. I think he can probably see the field better than Trevor can, as we've seen with those interceptions to linebackers. And now we've seen that possibly he might run the zone read better than Trevor Knight. So I mean, I think there's a solid chance he's the guy moving forward.
Yeah, I said that on Twitter. I said Cody Thomas was a better runner than Trevor Knight on Twitter during the game, and I got a lot of people agreeing with me. I got some people who didn't agree with me, and I don't think he's a faster runner than Trevor Knight. Let's make that distinction. But he makes the reads better. He carries out fakes better. And the defensive ends were doing things in that game at Texas Tech that they hadn't done all year because I think of the way that Cody Thomas was carrying out those zone reads. He made just a great bootleg run where he was free and clear there. And if he can do that better than Trevor Knight, that really takes away Trevor Knight's main advantage that we thought he had over Cody Thomas, because I think you and I have seen it. We always go back to this, but you and I went and watched him play in high school. I don't think there's any doubt that he has a better arm, pure arm strength than Justice Hansen, than Trevor Knight. We're getting really ahead of ourselves here.
Yeah.
But then Trevor Knight. And also, you talked about the interceptions. Looking at those interceptions that he had, at times Trevor Knight has got interceptions because he gets tunnel vision a little bit, locks in on one receiver, doesn't even move his head any other way, and it winds up with a guy stepping in a lane and intercepting it, and usually bringing it back for big yardage. And he's had a couple pick sixes this year. I didn't get the sense that Cody Thomas's mistakes that he was making was the same on the same level as that.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And I do want to come back to what you said about Trevor. Well, people think that Trevor Knight's a better runner because he's faster. To that, I would say, do you think Alex Ross or Samaje Perine is a better running back? Because Alex Ross is unquestionably faster, but Samaje does other things better. And I'm not saying that Cody Thomas is a knockdown, drag-out sort of runner, but he just does other things better. It's not all about speed.
Yeah, it's about decisions. It's about when you hit a hole. It's about deciding to keep the ball or pitch it. It's about all those things, especially in that zone read that OU runs.
Yeah, and so I think, even though Texas Tech's defense is awful, they're just terrible.
Yeah, but let's get that out of the way.
And I don't think it has anything to do with any signals being given to anybody. I think they just stink. So let's just say that right now. But I think just watching the way Cody runs that zone read and the way he holds the ball a little longer, forces that defensive end to crash a little bit more, and the decisions he makes when he's out in open space. Trevor has a tendency to just look sort of like he doesn't know what to do when he gets out in open space. And so I think that is why I would say even against a bad defense, there's a chance I think that Cody is actually a better runner than Trevor Knight.
Yeah, and how important do you think this 3-game stretch is? And like I said, we don't know if Cody Thomas is going to be the quarterback in Bedlam, but you've got this stretch here, 3 games to end the season against the teams that are in the lower part of the Big 12. They had Texas Tech, now they have Kansas, and then Oklahoma State. That Cody Thomas has some room to make some of those mistakes that are just inevitable for young quarterbacks when they're coming into the game. So he can get that much of a leg up going into this offseason, where the coaches have been pretty clear that spot is going to be up for grabs after this.
Yeah, they're not committing to Trevor Knight moving forward, and that could be for any number of reasons. It could be because of how inconsistent he's been, and how maybe they've seen something out of Cody now that they think he can be the guy. It could also be related to Trevor Knight's health. We still don't know how severe his injury is, and we don't know whether that's something that he's going to truly be able to ever come back from fully. So there's a lot of reasons why I think the job will be open in the spring. But you're right. Against a couple of not very good teams, he can sort of get these mistakes out of the way, get going, go into a bowl game, potentially start a bowl game if it's the Alamo Bowl, which I think it probably will be, against a good team like UCLA or Arizona State or Arizona or somebody like that. And those are all good teams. And he could maybe have a good bowl game there. Then who knows what could happen. If Trevor Knight comes back and plays well in the bowl game, I still think the job might be open in the spring. It's going to be really interesting. I just can't believe we're already having another quarterback debate because I thought 11 months ago this was settled.
Yeah, and then, you talk about those two guys. We also throw Justice Hansen, who I mistakenly mentioned earlier, and some guy named Baker Mayfield into this mix, and it becomes even more intriguing.
Yeah, Baker Mayfield to me, though, I've said it before, I think he's a good player, but I think that people very much overrate his year at Texas Tech. I mean, he's a guy who had some good games, but he also did it in against some of their weaker opponents. He still threw, I think, 9 interceptions. And everybody talks about how well he played in the spring game, and he did, but he was against like third and fourth string defense a lot of times. He's thrown against walk-ons out there. So I just think that maybe we need to
tap the brakes on that one a little bit.
Yeah,
and I think, to me, maybe Baker Mayfield is the best choice at backup, regardless of who you pick at quarterback. But maybe, Cody Thomas or Trevor Knight or Justice Hansen is your number one guy, depending on how that competition goes.
Yeah.
And, Jason, on the defensive side for Oklahoma on Saturday, sort of the similar way when we're talking about, going first half to second half. The first half, we saw a lot of the same issues that reared their head against Baylor. And obviously Texas Tech's talent wasn't near what Baylor has, either at quarterback or wide receiver. But we still saw some of those same problems coming in, whether it's, DBs sitting back well off the line of scrimmage, giving them a cushion, or getting beat down the field. Is that concerning at all to you moving forward, especially given the level of competition they're playing?
Well, yeah, I mean, sure, it's concerning, but I also think that you really have to keep in mind the inexperience back there. I mean, even when Julian Wilson's playing, he's a senior, but he's never played corner at this level. And Jordan Thomas was starting his first game. I think he's going to be a really good player, but you can't expect that he's going to, not make any mistakes. And he did make some mistakes. Stephen Parker is still a freshman. Ahmad Thomas is still young. And there's got to be a reason, too, that they're leaving Ahmad Thomas in that spot. I mean, Hatari Bird is right there, and I think everybody thought he was going to maybe be playing by now. But if he's not playing by now, then that means they don't have any better options right now. Yeah. And I think Ahmad Thomas is a talented guy, and he's done well in some moments, but he's got to get better. And I think a lot of it is just being in the right place, knowing where you're supposed to be. And that seems to be the issue a lot of times with the safeties especially. And then with Jordan Thomas, I mean, he's just turning the wrong way. He's got getting over to his spot a little bit late. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are causing that, and those are all things that will work themselves out at some point, I think. But I do think it's encouraging how well Zach Sanchez has played. I think we've sort of forgotten about that because, he had the bad game at West Virginia, although he was hurt.
And he was going against a wide receiver who's pretty dang good.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that, that people aren't throwing to Zach Sanchez's side, and I think that's a big reason he hasn't intercepted a pass in a while, and I think he's playing well.
Yeah, definitely. And I talked to him after the game in Lubbock, and he admitted that he'd gotten a little bit frustrated by the fact that nobody was going his way because everybody was going, and the formation and the scheme that OU uses defensively, everybody was going toward Julian Wilson's side, Ahmad Thomas's side, and didn't even try really to go his way, especially in the Baylor game. Texas Tech actually went after Sanchez a little bit, and Sanchez played really well and almost had him another interception, didn't quite pull it down. But I think they're going to be all right at corner. I'm with you. I think Jordan Thomas had some issues that a young cornerback is going to have, but there are things that are easily correctable, and I think he will correct. I mean, this is a really bright guy. You've talked to him. I've talked to him. He's an interesting guy to talk to and very aware. I think he's going to be fine. Now, safety is the real concern on this team, and I know, like you said, if they're still running Ahmad Thomas out there, and he is getting a little bit better, but they're still running Ahmad Thomas out there, that says more about what they've got behind him than what Ahmad Thomas is doing. And we're also seeing it on the recruiting trail as they're starting to go after some junior college safeties to try to get somebody in there next year who can play immediately.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Stephen Parker is somebody who you can really look at as somebody I expect will play a lot next year and will start a lot next year, and not as a third DB or third safety, but as one of the two. And I think Will Sunderland is going to have the Midwest City kid's going to have every opportunity to come in and play next year. The interesting thing to me is that they keep recruiting these defensive backs, these incoming freshmen who are playing, and then things don't work out, so they have to go get new freshmen. Is that how you see it too? Because I mean,
yeah.
You think about it. I mean, last year there was Stan Von Taylor and Dakota Austin who played fairly a lot for being true freshmen when Colvin was out or whatever. And now those guys never play anymore. And now it's Jordan Thomas at safety. Stephen Parker is there and Ahmad Thomas is there, and they're young guys playing. But now they're going after JUCO guys. It's like they keep getting these new inexperienced people in, and they're not working out, so they keep having to go get new young inexperienced guys. And if these guys don't get enough experience to get better, or they're just not going to work out, that's a problem.
Yeah, it's a big-time problem when you look at recruiting, because you're either going to have to run them off, or you're going to take a hit just in your space that you have. You're not going to have enough room to bring in guys that can step up into those spots. So they've really got to fix things with their recruiting at that spot, because it's getting to a critical mass. And we've talked about this for weeks, if not months. There's two areas in the Big 12 where you cannot be deficient, and that is wide receivers and defensive backs. And right now, OU's deficient in both.
Yeah, they are. And yeah, like we were saying, I mean, at defensive back, or at cornerback, I would have never imagined that Stan Von Taylor and Dakota Austin would be playing so little this year. I mean, that's unbelievable to me. I thought Dakota Austin was going to start at that other corner spot. I really did. And the fact that he never even plays, and then there's Stan Von Taylor. I mean,
he started a game last year.
And now he doesn't play that often. They've got this freshman that is playing, and it's really an interesting thing. And I don't know whether it's a talent evaluation problem, or if it is a problem with development, or if something is happening that these guys just aren't as encouraged to play. And I think, you're going to write about this later this week, the Mike Stoops yelling issue, screaming at them on the sidelines. And, some kids don't respond to that, especially as, society has advanced and progressed. And I think that, maybe that's an issue they're going to have to talk about or think about.
Yeah, definitely. And we see it play out on television. These are games that recruits are watching. These are games that their parents are watching. Now, right or wrong, because I think we're both in agreement that there are times when yelling is something that you need to do on a football field. But right or wrong, it's become less and less acceptable. Josh Heupel talked about it yesterday, that the sort of attitude around kids has gotten to such, and it's usually cranky old men that bring this up, sort of the walk 5 miles uphill both ways to school mentality. But they talk about everybody gets a trophy now, everybody gets trophies and orange slices for everybody after every game. But Josh Heupel said that's something that he's got to be very aware of when he's deciding how he goes after kids and how he motivates kids when things aren't going right on the field.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that maybe I think about Stephen Parker, and I don't know anything. I just I know that what I know is that he's a really good player, and I know that he was highly recruited by a lot of people. I know that there's a reason he's in the games right now. I know there's a reason he's been starting. And the fact that things just still aren't clicking for him, you have to wonder why that is, why he's still having some of these same problems. And some of it you can chalk up to inexperience. But I do think there is a legitimate question to be asked about the way he's being motivated, or people are trying to motivate him. And if maybe that just doesn't work on him. I mean, we covered him in high school some. You and I have both met him and talked to him when he was at Jenks. He's a pretty quiet kid. He doesn't seem to me to be a real rah-rah sort of guy himself. So I can't imagine that he is going to respond extremely well to when he makes a mistake being berated in front of his teammates and on television, because a lot of people are seeing that on TV, and you have to wonder if it's going to affect recruiting in the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. And Mike Stoops talked about it a little bit last week. I'm sure we'll talk about it more tonight, Tuesday night, when we're talking. But he just said that's how he grew up and how he was, the environment that he was raised in, and that's just what they do. They get animated and yell and scream, and then it's behind him a few minutes later. But
maybe it is for them, but that doesn't mean that is for an 18-year-old kid.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't work like that psychologically for everybody. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on. And Jason, another thing to keep an eye on, especially this week as OU's at home, another 11 a.m. game, is the crowd that's going to be in attendance Saturday morning. There's a chance it could be rainy, could be not the best environment to come watch football. It's another 11 a.m. game. They've had this crazy streak of morning games at home. What do you look for? What do you think the crowd's going to be like on Saturday in Norman against the Jayhawks?
I don't think it's going to be great. I think it might be the worst home crowd of the Stoops era, because this is – I mean, shoot. I'm thinking off the top of my head. I think this is probably the most disappointing season of the Stoops era. I mean, if you look at 2005, you knew you had a new quarterback. You knew that there was always the expectation throughout that year, even though it didn't work out for totally different reasons. There was always the expectation that Rhett Bomar was going to improve and be a really good player eventually. So there was some excitement there. Adrian Peterson was only a sophomore. There was still a really good defense. 2009, you go into that season excited, and it was disappointing, but not because of anything. Yeah, it was mainly because of Sam Bradford and Jermaine Gresham and Gerald McCoy all being hurt at different times. And so you could sort of excuse that because you had Landry Jones as a freshman, and they still won 8-5 that year. 8-4, 8-5, 8-5.
Yeah,
I don't remember 8-4 or 8-5. Anyway, but this season, and even in the other seasons where maybe they had national championship hopes, they still would win 10, 11 games and win a Big 12 championship or I'm using air quotes here, Big 12 championship. But this time there's no chance for that. That's not going to happen. There was excitement about Trevor Knight. He got hurt, but not until after they'd already lost 3 games. I think fans are really disappointed, and I don't think they want to get up early to go to this game. And Kansas isn't any good, and it's going to, like you said, it could be rainy. I would not be surprised if there are 10 or 12,000 empty seats in the stadium.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. It's not like the fans who have the tickets are going to be able to unload them on other people. Maybe the casual fan who just wants to go to a game. If it's rainy and nasty, they're not going to.
Kansas.
Yeah, and it's Kansas. They're not going to want to sit out there, for even a half of that, just to say they went to an OU game. I think it's one thing to have one of those factors, but when you have multiple factors going against you, and yet another 11 a.m. start, you've got to get down there, by 9 or so. It just drains you, and I think it'll be. Probably the worst crowd of the Stoops era. Maybe take away that Texas Tech game a few years ago that was played so late at night because of the delay.
Yeah, but that doesn't count.
Yeah, that's different because of the circumstances.
People would have been there.
Yeah, and there were people in the stands before they announced the delay, and
they were number one in the country at that point.
Yeah, so that game was a strange one. But if we're talking straight up, the game starts on time, goes through. I think it's going to be the weakest crowd, and it's going to be funny. It is funny to me that the sellout streak, and I understand the reasons behind it, and I know that those tickets are sold and everything, but it's still strange to see them announce sellouts when there's big chunks of empty seats.
Yeah. And can you explain to me something? Maybe you know this. I genuinely do not know the answer to this question. How is it that if there are a certain number of seats in the stadium, how is the attendance number different? How are records broken when they've not added any new seats? Do you know the answer? Because I don't. I really don't.
Well, I do know part of it. I think one of the answer is us, because they count us. They count media, credentialed people.
I did not know
as
that.
Part of it, and that's my understanding. So, when there's a lot of credentialed media, there's a lot of recruits, there's a lot of things like that. They count those as people in the stadium, which can inflate the number.
Do they count like security personnel?
Probably
Do they count players?
Who knows? Maybe so. Maybe Bob Stoops counts as one of those.
I really don't know.
80-some thousand. But, yeah, it's strange. And also, I thought it was strange that they announced a game this year, and it might have been this one, as a sellout before, not long after the tickets went on sale. They have a small number of single-game tickets that they allot. But then later, Kansas returned tickets, and it's still a sellout. But also, they announced the sellout before all of the single seats were sold. It was just the pairs.
Yeah.
So if they sold all the pairs, well, then they could say that it was a sellout. That is a little bit squirrely to me.
It's so weird. The whole thing is weird. It's like, to me, is every seat filled? Has every seat been purchased?
Yeah.
That's a sellout. That's what a sellout should be. And even if it technically is a sellout, if every seat's been sold, and it looks like I think it's going to look on Saturday, have a little dignity. Don't announce that it's the 49th or 120th, whatever, consecutive sellout. Come on.
Yeah, they want to keep that streak going because Bob Stoops has never had a non-sellout at home during his tenure with the Sooners. So that's the that's the reason
I get
behind it. And let's also be clear, this isn't just an OU thing. Nebraska has had many instances that are worse than some of the ones that OU's had, and they still claim sellout.
Yeah, I know. It's certainly not just an OU problem. It's an everybody problem.
Yeah.
It's just funny to me because that's the games we're at. That's the games that I hear that announced at. So I don't know that I've ever heard it announced at another place. If I did, I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, and I'm sure it is, but it is sort of gives you a chuckle when you watch it and see it. So, and I think, Jason, going back to this 11 a.m. thing, there's a good chance that Bedlam could be an 11 a.m. kickoff too.
Yeah,
and that just keeps the streak going, and it would mean that there's only 2 home games for OU this season that are played anytime other than 11, and that was the Louisiana Tech game to start the season and the Tennessee game a couple weeks later.
Yeah, I know, and the Bedlam being 11 a.m. I mean, it was 11 a.m. last year. I think I sort of get that, but it is weird. It's strange. It's funny because just 2-3 years ago, right before my first season on the beat, Bob Stoops was in an interview. It was me and Barry Trammell talking to him before the season, and he said he really thought the Big 12 just had to do something. They play way too many night games. It's not fair. They play way too many night games. And now, yesterday at the press conferences, Big 12's got to do something about this. We're playing way too many 11 a.m. games. But I understand his point. The things need to be a little bit more spread out, but it is sort of funny that the pendulum has just swung so far back and forth, and all he wants is balance, and he's not getting it.
Yeah, and I asked Ty Darlington about it yesterday, and he sort of looked at me with his eyes wide and said, "We're playing at 11 a.m. again." He genuinely acted like he had no clue that they were playing at 11 a.m. again.
Well, somebody probably needed to let the starting center know what time the game starts.
You would think so. And he said, sometimes I find out a couple days before. Sometimes I happen to see it a week before or so. But he didn't know that it was 11 a.m.
He's going to roll out of bed about noon. And his cell phone's going to be blown up. And
hear the crowd as Neela Casatati is playing center for them.
Yeah.
They have to pull Jonathan Alvarez out there. And I got a tweet yesterday from when I wrote what Bob Stoops said yesterday about the 11 a.m. kicks. I got a tweet yesterday from a bar in Norman that said, small businesses don't like this much either.
That's interesting. What bar was it?
It was 747 Dining and Drinks.
Oh, 747. Yeah. That's a Campus Corner spot. Yeah.
Okay. I cannot say I've ever been there, but
I actually haven't been there either. But I know a lot of people who have.
maybe we need to check it out sometime.
I don't think we're quite cool enough to go to 747.
Not our.
I wasn't
scene.
cool enough in college to go to 747.
Okay.
So.
Well, if you weren't cool enough, then I certainly wasn't. So, maybe. But if you're out there in Norman and you happen to be out after the game and you are cool enough, then you should check it out. So, Jason, this week, looking at Kansas, and Kansas played TCU awfully close last week. They played a couple opponents closer than I think a lot of people thought since Bowen took over as the interim coach. But not talking about the opponent really much, but what are a couple of things that you're really looking for on Saturday out of the Sooners?
Well, it's sort of tough to say. It's tough to gauge. I mean, if Cody Thomas goes out there and plays a great game, it's hard to say if that's what that really means. I mean, it's Kansas, and their defense has been better, but it's just hard to. It's going to be really hard to gauge what we can learn maybe about this team in this game. And I think we're going to be able to say the same thing about Bedlam. The only difference in Bedlam is, even though Oklahoma State's offense is just pitiful right now, at least it's a big rivalry, and there's a lot of there's a lot of pride there. And we've seen before. I'll never forget the 2001 Bedlam game in Norman. Oklahoma State had no business winning that game. I mean, that was Les Miles' first team, and they were not good. They didn't go to a bowl. And if OU had won that game, they were going to go back to the Big 12 championship with a chance to go back to the national championship game. And Oklahoma State beat them 16-13. So I'm not saying that's going to happen this time, but I think that worse OU teams have beaten better, worse OSU teams have beaten better OU teams.
Yeah,
or at least one time that happened.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that, Jason. One more sort of question that we didn't talk about before, but I think it's important to address. There's been all of the Florida rumors. After the Gators fired
ridiculous
Will Muschamp earlier this week, you've written that Bob Stoops isn't leaving for this job because of several reasons. He'd have to play in the same division as his brother, Mark, who's the head coach at Kentucky. Right now, Steve Spurrier is also in that division. I can't imagine that he would want to play both those guys every year. So we've established that Bob Stoops isn't taking this job. Who is?
Florida?
Yeah. or who's your who would you say is the
I don't know
big time candidate?
I think that some of these it sounds like Foley wants to go with the offensive guy. I think Hugh Freeze is interesting. I don't expect that he's going to leave Ole Miss. What he's building there is really impressive, and shoot, they should have beat Auburn if they don't have a bad break. It doesn't sound like Dan Mullen is a candidate, which I think is sort of a shame because I think he would be really good there.
Yeah, Dan Mullen and Rich Rodriguez have both reported that they won't be candidates.
Well, Rich Rodriguez, I think there's maybe some other issues there, but Dan Mullen's got history there. I guess him and Foley don't get along, but I do think Hugh Freeze is an interesting candidate. I think I thought it was ridiculous at first, but the more I've thought about it, I do think Mike Gundy is an interesting candidate. Just because we know, we know now the issues that he has with Boone Pickens. If we didn't already, we certainly know them now after the last couple of days, and we know that he's flirted with other schools before. That's an interesting name. I really don't know what they're going to do. It's going to be really interesting to follow. What I do know is that it's not going to be Bob Stoops, and anybody who thinks that it is. I shouldn't say that because I'm going to say that and then it's going to happen and then I'm going to look stupid. I would say 99.9% it's not happening, and there's a lot of reasons for it. The biggest reason I think, though, is he's not going to play against his brother.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think two interesting names for me are Jim McElwain, who's done such a great job at Colorado State this year, has them at least in the discussion of being the top non-Power 5 team. And another one of those coaches, Doc Holliday at Marshall. Both of those guys have been brought up a little bit as well. I don't know. I think maybe Florida is going to want a sexier name.
Yeah.
But we've seen, as we talked about in our meeting this morning, that sometimes the sexy name isn't the one that winds up doing well for you. Bob Stoops wasn't the sexy name when he was hired here at OU.
No, he wasn't. And really, I mean, Urban Meyer was a popular candidate for some other jobs. He was obviously being courted by other people, but I mean, he came from a mid-major school too. So I mean, I don't think that we should shoot down the mid-major idea. I think there's a chance that could work. We've also seen Brady Hoke where it doesn't work, but I do think there's something to be said for some of these mid-major jobs. I don't know if the Colorado State or Marshall guys, I don't know. They don't feel. I don't know. I'm not buying it.
Feeling it
I'm
on
not
those
buying
guys?
it. But I don't know anything. I'm totally just guessing here.
Yeah, and that's sort of the point of this whole thing. Is just to
have fun and talk. I like. I do a name that I think is going to be big, and maybe not this year, but Justin Fuente is going to be a big time coach at some point. He's going to be a coach at a big time college before too long. What he's done at Memphis is fantastic.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, they've got a chance to win that conference, and I know their conference isn't what it's been in the past.
Oh no,
but Memphis. I mean, think about what Memphis football was, 2, 3, 4 years ago, and it's just unbelievable that turnaround that they've made.
Yeah, it's a basketball school. It's what I've always thought of it as a basketball school, and and I'm sure it probably still is, but their football team is not terrible anymore. And just the job Justin Fuente's done is very impressive, and it would not surprise. I think he's probably going to have to show it for a few more years, at least one more year, before some big time school comes calling. But I think he's a guy everybody should keep their eye on.
And sticking with this Florida thing a little bit, just because there's a couple guys who affect things that OU does that have been thrown out as possibilities. Do you think there's any chance that either Charlie Strong or Gary Patterson take this job?
No, I don't think so. I don't think Gary Patterson, he wants an offensive track record. He's got 10 games of it. So, no, I don't think Gary Patterson. And Charlie Strong, the timing's not right. I think if they'd have fired Will Muschamp last year, then yeah, I think he would be at Florida right now. But this is his first year at Texas. He's got things moving in the right direction. Seems to me that he likes it there. I don't think he's going to Florida. I really don't think Charlie Strong's going, and I don't think they want Gary Patterson, honestly.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you on both those points. I don't think either of those guys are going, but it is interesting that both of them are being brought up, especially Gary Patterson, given the defensive nature of his track record and Jeremy Foley's stated objective of getting a high-powered offense into Gainesville. But it'll be interesting to me to watch see how that unfolds. I think Michigan's probably going to come open here in a few weeks as well as they move on from Brady Hoke. Well, that'll be some more interesting speculation. They've got to hire an athletic director first, but it's definitely getting close to the silly season in college football.
Mm-hmm, no doubt.
So, all right, Jason. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you so much for joining us. And you can check us out every day at newsok.com and every morning in the Oklahoman for the best OU coverage anywhere.